And F in this situation is failure. And what you have too few A's and too many F's. That's the picture. And F in this case means failure. Now what we have is a set of statistics that approximates what is really happening in the schools. This kind of a shaped curve, given all the rumors and all the reporting and all the history, this particular configuration of data begins to really closely approximate reality. But it isn't the whole story. The whole story, you have to unwind it like an onion. We're trying to get down to the core problem. The problem is that the BGCSE scores are for all schools. And in fact, what we have out there is two distinct academic worlds. What I did here was to take the high schools on New Providence, and the dark columns are for the public schools, and the light blue columns are for the private schools. And there's a significant difference. The peak grade for all public schools on New Providence is an F, and an F means failure. And that accounts for 43% of all the exams written. The peak grade for all private schools is a C. 35% of all exams written is a C. The surprising thing is the fact that there are some private schools whose academic record is not what they ought to be. But even this doesn't really give us, still not down to the core of the problem. We get there by recognizing that there is economic excellence here in the Bahamas. And what I've done is I've taken the two New Providence high schools that had the public high school that had the highest grade and the private school that had the highest grade. And we're talking about C.W. Bethel and St. Augustine. In that year, St. Augustine bested its nearest rival by, would you believe, 0.02 point on a 4-point grading system. Now the picture of those two schools is this. And that's the difference in the performance between a top public school and a top private school. The good news is that there are centers of economic excellence in the Bahamas. St. Augustine is an example of excellence. C.W. Bethel is not. And what's the conclusion? The conclusion is that the problem is it's a public high school problem. Now even this, we're not down to bedrock yet, because what you have to do is you have to start looking at subjects. Now we're going to look at only the public high schools, and we're going to look at two subjects. We're looking at English and math. And let's just take a look at what the results show. That's the picture of mathematics performance for the public high schools. This is the picture of the performance in mathematics. Now, if we put those graphs, those two pie charts, into words, what we have is this. In English, 44% passed and 56% failed. 17% both failed and were functionally illiterate in English. The math picture is, of course, more dismal because only 18% passed, 82% failed. 46% both failed and were functionally illiterate. And the question is what does somebody who is functionally illiterate in math not be able to do? You can't tell the difference between addition and multiplication. These high failure and illiteracy rates in the public high schools are unacceptable. The reports of the testing service in the printed reports that are totally confidential they do say this. They are described as being unacceptable. This is how the testing and evaluation section of the Department of Education describes it all. Now, what's the consequences? In a world where knowledge is growing so fast, and with the Bahamas in a status quo situation, the Bahamian learning gap between it and the leaders of the world will only grow. In other words, the disadvantages faced by this country will only get greater if nothing is done to change it. Now, you ask the question, so what? Bottom line, what difference does it make? Let's look at the economic basics. A classmate of mine at the University of Chicago, who was the best of the bunch at the time I was there, is Gary Becker. And in a popular encyclopedia on economics and the discussion of human capital, Gary has this quotation: "Large increases in education and training have accompanied major advances in technological knowledge in all countries that have achieved significant economic growth." Gary Becker got his Nobel laureate in economics in 1992. What we have is we have a world in which technologically the world is changing at an accelerating rate. This has been described at some length by a futurist and inventor by the name of Ray Kurzweil, who has gone back to the beginning of time and plotted out all the major advances that mankind has made. And what he has observed is what you have through time, and in the beginning it's long periods of time, but you have a gradually accelerating rate of growth in technological capabilities and knowledge. Persistent academic failure and illiteracy increase the international learning gap for any country who is sitting stationary with its educational system. Now, countries compete globally in the business world, and this is covered ad nauseum, affects everybody. Everybody knows about it, the emergence of India and China, the fact that when you go in the United States, there isn't anything you seemingly are able to buy that's not made in China. Disturbing fact of life, but that's reality. And one of the things that countries have learned is they compete in that world, and they compete with their education systems. And there have been two testing systems developed in the world. One called TIMSS, the Trend in Mathematics and Science Studies, which was originated and built by the United States and the Pacific Rim countries. And the other is called PISA, P-I-S-A, and that was developed by the European countries and the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Now, what happens is with the TIMSS group, this test is given every 4 years to about the present number of countries in this testing system is about 55 different countries. The results on the TIMSS for 2007 for the 8th grade math scores were: the top 5 countries are Singapore, South Korea, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Japan. The bottom 5 countries are the Philippines, Botswana, Saudi Arabia, Ghana, and South Africa. If you look at the scores, they neatly break down into 4 broad categories, 4 groupings. The reality, the uncomfortable reality for the United States is it is not in the top group, it's in the second group. The uncomfortable reality for the Bahamas would be that if you look at the BGCSE system, you look at how they define standards, and you look at the standards that are published for the TIMSS system, you can get a broad feel that probably the Bahamas will rank in the bottom quartile. In other words, they may